Hello, I would like to welcome all of those listening in to the Nahms 2021 Swine Large Enterprise Training. Due to some unexpected technical difficulties, this recording is being done post-training and is not a recording from the live training that took place on Wednesday, June 30th, 2021. Unfortunately, that means this recording will not contain excerpts from Dr. Lynn Watchman or the live Q&A session at the end of the training. We apologize for any inconvenience and have tried to cover the items that were discussed. Many of you already know me, but for those who do not, my name is Ann Corser, and I am the team lead of the livestock section. The livestock team is looking forward to discussing the Nahms survey with you today. Before we get started, I would like to encourage you to spend some time reviewing the materials posted on the Purdue Nahms page. There are various industry letters in support of this important survey, prepared materials with additional information, frequently asked questions, and reasons to respond, and even links to a few videos from the National Pork Board. All of these should help you to feel more comfortable as you begin calling these producers for the survey. You can charge up to 3 hours of home study time to Nahms, and reviewing this page would be a great way to spend some of that time. So let's get into the survey. During this training, we'll be covering many of the items that were presented during the live training, including an introduction to the Nahms study and purpose, an overview of the survey, as well as a review of the survey materials, timeline, and logistics. So what is the purpose of the Nahms surveys? NASS and Nahms have partnered on over 30 national studies of animal health and management since 1990. These surveys cover all manner of livestock, including cattle, goats, horses, bison, and of course swine, which is the current study we are getting ready to conduct. This will be the 6th national study of U.S. large enterprise swine operations, and is designed to provide participants and stakeholders benchmark information about the U.S. swine industry. In general, there are many uses for Nahms survey data. Policymakers use them to make better informed decisions related to legislation and to facilitate trade negotiations. Researchers and health experts use them to identify health issues and research needs, and producers use them to access industry information that isn't collected by anyone else. Now I'd like to talk more specifically about the objective of the Nahms 2021 swine study. This is a one-of-a-kind study that provides the swine industry 30 years of national snapshots, occurring every 5 to 8 years. The purpose of the NASS component of this study is to compile essential industry information involving the areas of swine housing, swine management, production metrics, and site biosecurity. This information is being collected on all phases of production, including gestation, farrowing, nursery, grower-finisher, and wean to finish. It provides both participants and industry stakeholders with information on the U.S. swine industry that can only come from the producers themselves. There was some verbiage from one of the documents that I really liked. This survey allows swine producers to play an important role in safeguarding the U.S. swine industry by providing transparent, credible information on production practices to help counter misinformation and ultimately protect swine production in the United States.
Hi there everybody, my name's Jack Hegel. I'm relatively new to the Great Lakes region, so I haven't had the opportunity to speak with you all yet. That being said, I'm looking forward to working with you, and I'd like to thank you for being a part of this project. I'm going to give a brief overview of the 2 surveys which constitute the large enterprise study. I'll start by exploring a few key definitions and points of interest. related to the study. Then I'll explain the process for obtaining Phase 2 consent, the EPA ID number, and the site selection process. Finally, I'll discuss some important things to keep in mind when conducting your interviews. So without any further ado, let's get into it. The Large Enterprise Study is looking at operations in 13 states with 1,000 or more swine. These operations account for over 90% of operations with 1,000 or more swine in the U.S. The national sample size encompasses 2,149 operations, which corresponds to approximately 4,085 sites. I'll go over the distinction between operations and sites shortly. Of those operations, 325 are in the Great Lakes region, 178 in Indiana, 45 in Michigan, and 102 in Ohio. Based on that number and the expected national operation-to-site ratio, we're looking at around 600 sites in our region, though this is kind of an estimation on my part. Take it with a grain of salt. Before exploring the surveys themselves, it would be beneficial to go over two particular concepts that are critical to the manner in which this study is being conducted. These concepts are operations and sites. An operation, sometimes called a contractor, includes all sites where swine belonging to the person or entity are raised. It is the nucleus or the centerpiece of the system. A site, by contrast, consists of a physically distinct area, an address, with pig production facilities and support structures. It typically specializes in a production phase, such as breeding pigs, nursery-aged pigs, or grower-finisher pigs, and is sometimes called a contractee. The study starts out by looking at things from the operation level, but most of your time will be spent looking at things from the site level. It's broken down like this so that Nahms can pinpoint disease activity and biosecurity practices to specific areas, i.e. the sites, rather than to specific operations, where enterprises may be spread out over several states or areas. For those of you following along on the presentation included on the Purdue site, we've got a handy visual representation of the operation and site relationship. In most cases, the sites are physically distinct from the operations. There are a few cases, such as independent growers, which you can see on the right of that slide, where the operation and the site are one and the same. However, this sort of thing is rare for the large operations this study is looking at, so you probably won't have to worry about that too much. As you've likely noticed from your review of the interviewer's manuals, there are two surveys which constitute this study. The first of these is the Large Enterprise Survey Selection Form, or the LESSF, or the Site Selection Form. The LESSF is the survey that you begin with. It focuses on operation-level information, such as operation inventory, number of sites, and breakdown of sites by state and type of pigs. Additionally, you'll use this form to select sites for follow-up, and to obtain operation consent for Phase 2. Each site selection form is pre-assigned to an operation, and you'll only complete one per operation. The second survey is the Large Enterprise Survey, or LES. This survey looks at things from the perspective of the sites selected in the site selection form. It asks about site inventory, swine health, biosecurity practices, and farm management. You'll also use it to obtain site consent for Phase 2. Each site selected on the site selection form will fill out a copy of the LES. Depending upon the number of sites and the type of pigs they raise, you may need to fill out up to 9 LES surveys per operation. However, don't be stressed. You likely will have that many to do only in the cases of the largest operations. Additionally, because the LES is broken down into sections based on pig production phase, you will likely not need to fill out all sections for all surveys, as most sites specialize in just one phase. For those of you following along on the PowerPoint presentation, Slide 9 shows what you would do in the case of a typical operation-site relationship. You'd give the site selection form to the operation contact, and then the LESs to the site contacts. On Slide 10, we have an example of what you would do in the case of an independent grower situation. You'd give both the site selection form and the LES to the same contact, since they're the contact for both the operation and the site. But again, you probably won't have to worry about this too much with these large operations. As mentioned previously, in order for these operations to participate in Phase 2, we must obtain consent both at the operation and the site level. The operation contact is given the chance to consent at the end of the site selection form, specifically in Section 4, Question 1. Then, the site contact is given the chance at the end of the LES, specifically in Section 7, Question 1. There's a handy chart in the training presentation explaining the steps in the process. That can be found on slide 12 of the presentation. As you can see, it explains how to go about getting the consent from the operation contact before contacting the site contact and getting their consent. Given the importance of Phase 2 to this study, it is imperative that you try your hardest to sell it to these contacts. You can discuss with them some of the benefits outlined in interviewers' manuals and the pre-survey materials sent to respondents. You can also highlight the fact that this information will be used for statistical purposes only, and that their personal data is protected and will not be published in a way that would identify them. The presentation lists some sales points that you can mention in your interviews with reluctant producers. This is shown on slide 13. These include the study being designed to collect information specifically requested by swine industry representatives and government officials, the output reports from the study being useful in trade negotiations and beneficial in disease response planning for things like African swine flu. And finally, estimates of commercial swine raising produced by this study will help combat misinformation. It's possible that an operation who refuses consent during the operation level interview may be able to be coaxed into providing consent if the sites provide their consent during their interviews. Therefore, don't treat the operation as a lost cause if they refuse. Note their initial refusal, but reach out to them and try again if you can get permission from the sites. Likewise, if the sites initially refuse despite belonging to a consenting operation, it might be fruitful to get back in touch with the operation contact to see if they can't talk some sense into them. One thing that I want to point out is that it may be fruitful for you to provide the site contacts with a copy of the LES survey so that they can look it over before your interviews, just so they can kind of familiarize themselves with the material. On slide 14 of the presentation, there's a link to a PDF copy on Nahms' website. Please feel free to use that however you would like. One crucial component of this study is the EPA ID. EPA stands for External Project Agreement, not Environmental Protection Agency. This functions as the study's stand-in for the POID. Each operation has a 9-digit EPA ID, consisting of a 2-digit state code, 3 zeros, and a unique 4-digit operation ID. This EPA ID number will be labeled on the front page of the site selection form. You'll want to confirm that it's there when you get your survey forms, and that the correct FIPS code is recorded. This EPA ID number will be used again for each of the LES forms that are completed. On the front of each LES form, you need to write down the operation's EPA ID number. You'll need also to fill in the site number field using the site number assigned to each of the selected sites in the site selection form. It is imperative that each LES has a correctly filled in EPA ID. This is how we will be handling these reports in the office and keeping them together, so be sure to take care of it to avoid serious processing issues. I wanted to go over the site selection process so that everyone is familiar with what to do here. This step takes place in Section 3 of the site selection form, and there are essentially two main steps to it. The first, items 1 and 2, deal with selecting sites with breeding swine. These sites must be in the state indicated by the state code in the EPA ID, and they will be the sites that are geographically closest to the operation contact's location. The number of sites you select depends on the answer to Section 2, Question 4a, which asks about the total number of sites in the state with any breeding swine. If the contact indicates an answer of 1, choose the 1 site for the LES. If the answer is between 2 and 49, select 2 sites. If they indicate more than 50, choose 3. In item 2, you'll fill out the contact information for these sites. You'll also provide them with site numbers that will be used to complete the identification fields on the front of the LES forms. The second step is for sites without breeding swine. These sites will be from the operation's main state and will be selected from the total number of sites indicated in Section 2, Question 4b, as the geographically closest sites to the operation contact's location. If Question 4b is equal to 1, select the 1 site. If the answer is between 2 and 10, select 2. If between 11 and 49, choose 3. And if 50 or more, choose 6. In Item 4, you'll fill out the contact information for these sites and obtain their site numbers. On slide 21 of the presentation, for those of you following along, I've got a handy example that I borrowed from the Northeast region's presentation to their enumerator, illustrating how you go about transferring the EPA ID and the site number field to the LES form. It's fairly self-explanatory, but essentially you take the EPA ID off the front of the site selection form, and then you take the site numbers from the site selection section in that form, and you put it on the front of each large enterprise survey, the site surveys. I want to now briefly touch on the conclusion sections, as these are the sections that you will likely fill out even in the case of refusals or inaccessibles. Your interviewer's manuals have some detailed flowcharts breaking down the visit steps and how they relate to the conclusions and consent processes for both the site selection form and the LES. You can find these on slides 22 and 23 of the training presentation as well. I want to point out that even in the case of a refusal or an inaccessible, you will still need to fill out the operation response code item as well as the date and time codes. It would be prudent to touch on the other sections for each of the questionnaires. There are 4 sections to the site selection form. Section 1 focuses on operation inventory, breaking it down into specific PIG types. Section 2 focuses on the total number of sites, which is subsequently broken down by state and broad PIG production type. Sections 3 and 4 are the site selection and conclusion sections, respectively. The LES has 7 sections. The first of these deals with site-level inventory, broken down by specific PIG type. As mentioned previously, you likely won't be filling out all of these sections for each site. This is the case for sections 2 through 4. Section 2 focuses on the breeding herd, Section 3 on nursery-aged pigs, and Section 4 on grower-finisher pigs. Sites tend to specialize in production phases, as we've discussed previously. A site that needs Section 2 completed will likely not have nursery or grower-finisher pigs, thus allowing you to skip Sections 3 and 4. The reverse is also likely to be true, just something to keep in mind. Sections 5 and 6, which respectively deal with biosecurity and general site information, will probably be filled out in all cases. And of course, Section 7 is the conclusion. I want to bring up a few things to keep in mind when you're going through your interviews. Prior to your planned interview with the site contacts, it may be useful to provide them a copy, either a physical copy or an online link, of the LES form so they can acquaint themselves with the information that it's asking about. As we mentioned previously in this presentation, there's a link to Nahms' website where you can get a copy of the PDF of the LES questionnaire to send to these people if they would like it. You'll want to be aware of the different time periods used for different questions. Some questions don't specify a time period, while others use the last 3 months. Many use the period from December 1st, 2020 to May 31st, 2021, where they extend it to go from June 1st, 2020 to May 31st, 2021. Some just use a reference date of June 1st, 2021. Be aware of these differences, and make sure the respondent knows which time period to answer for. The same is also true of the units used for the answers. These units include numbers of heads, weeks, days, and groups, among other things. There are also some unique questions that ask you to select a code from a provided list and enter it into the item box, or allow the respondent to report in either whole numbers or percentages. For the purposes of this study, approximations are fine, but give the respondent time to produce a precise number if possible. If the respondent answers none to a question, write in a 0 for that item code, rather than simply leaving it blank. This helps reduce confusion on our end. Also, for questions where they select the other option, please specify what that other is. This will be useful for Nahms in allowing them to determine other practices that the swine industry is engaged in that they may not be familiar with. And I think that pretty much wraps up my part of the presentation. I want to thank you all again for coming out and listening to it, or for listening to this recording. I just want to wish you a happy interview session, and please reach out to us if you have any questions. Thanks again.
Thanks, Jack. Now I'm going to take some time to discuss the survey materials, logistics, and timeline for the Nahms questionnaire data collection. In your pre-survey packets that were sent out last week, you should have received the following: 2 interviewers' manuals, 1 for each questionnaire version, 2 blank questionnaires of each version, and a copy of the site selection and EPA ID example. The second mailing with your survey packets were sent out via UPS on Wednesday, June 30th, and should contain the following: labeled site selection questionnaires. These will be your assignments and are the yellow questionnaires. We tried to include 2 to 3 blank site selection questionnaires just in case you need them. A supply of the blank large enterprise surveys. We sent about 5 per sample for contacting the sites. These are the blue questionnaires. We also included a CAPI assignment listing. The assignments are now live on CAPI for you to view, but this is just for your reference, as all interviews should be done on paper. We've also included in your packets the following materials: a large enterprise summary sheet. This sheet gives a quick description of each section of the survey and can be used for reference during your interview. We've also included the large enterprise launch sheet. This sheet has a lot of great information about the study objectives and benefits to the producer. There are a few more things that you will receive in your survey packets that will hopefully help you out as you get ready to complete your work and send it in. The first is the enumerator checklist. You should receive a supply of these to use during data collection. This checklist, the steps that should be completed before the questionnaires are sent to be processed. By verifying the steps on this checklist have been completed, you can be assured that the processing of the questionnaire is correct. The second item included in your packet is a routing form to be sent along with your packages to the NOC for processing. This routing form will need to be filled out and sent with each package sent to the NOC. For your reference, we have posted an example on the Purdue site of how the form should be filled out before mailing. Along with these materials, we have included in your packet a supply of UPS labels for the NOC Forms Processing Group in St. Louis, Missouri. All completed paper questionnaires should be sent to this location. As I mentioned before, each package should include the FPG routing slip. It is important as well to remember to properly fill out the EPA ID on all forms to ensure that they are processed together. If you need additional UPS labels, please submit a request through the supply request link. I'll now talk briefly about the timeline for the survey. The data collection for the Nahms survey is July 6th through August 6th, with all work being sent in UPS by Friday, August 6th. We have set some target dates for mailing and would like you to mail all completed work each Friday starting on July 16th. While the week of August 2nd is available for data collection, it would be our preference that this week is set for appointments only, as well as verifying all completed work before mailing. As I mentioned before, Friday, August 6th is the last day for calling, and all work should be in UPS by the end of the day. This slide shows the contact information for Jack and myself. If you have any questions about the Nahms survey or processing, please feel free to reach out to us. As always, you can always reach out to your supervisor or NASDA coordinator with questions as well. As a reminder, there are 3 hours of study time, so please take time to study your interviewer's manual, supplemental information, and familiarize yourself with the questionnaire. Please reach out if you have any questions. And as always, thanks for all your work to make the Nahms survey a success.